Hello and welcome back, sleepywhatsit here, and I have another miniatures video for you. In today's video I'm going to show you how I assemble metal miniatures. So the miniature that we're going to be putting together here is Boron Ironbrow from Reaper's Dungeon Dwellers line. It comes with this tabbed or slotted base to go on the tab. We won't be using that. Instead I'm going to be basing them on this precast base, which probably comes from Secret Weapon or Micro Art Miniatures. So just taking a closer look at the miniature itself before we get started, you can see some of the fine detail that shows up when doing metal miniatures. You can also see a little bit here of, because of how well metal holds detail, that there's some thin mold lines, which it would be nice to clean those up. And you can see here that he's not actually possessing a right hand. And the reason he doesn't have a right hand is because this miniature comes with an option of weapons that you can use. So for the character that I'm doing here, we're going to be using the Warhammer, since that's what's most appropriate, though you could use either of the other two weapons that come on the sprue for your own character. I'll probably just throw them in my bit box to use other places. So looking a little bit closer at the base here, you'll notice that it doesn't have a slot for that tab to go into. So instead of carving a slot into the base, what we're going to be doing after we assemble the miniature is cutting this tab off and pinning the miniature down to the base. So the first thing we need to do is free the weapon that we want to use. So I'm going to be using some white metal snips. So these are different snips than plastic snips. They'll be very clearly labeled as such. Make sure to be using the right thing. If you use plastic snips on white metal, you'll just ruin them, and you'll be very unhappy. So realistically, you should have a pair of snips for plastic and a pair of snips for metal. Thankfully, the first two weapons here, it just kind of snapped off easily, so we don't have to cut them off. Unfortunately, the one weapon that I really do care about is the one that we have to work on to get it loose here. So when working with white metal and cutting it, what it may look like here is I'm trying to like chop right through it with one foul swoop. Don't try and do that. White metal kind of squishes out of the way, and that will damage your nippers. So what I've actually done is to put a little dent in it, and what I'm doing is kind of nibbling through here as slowly. So more like scissors than like plastic snips to get it loose. So even though I was being careful here, I did end up with a little bit of a rough edge from cutting it, which is just kind of symptomatic of working with white metal because of how soft it is. And the solution to this is we get out a metal file, like this little one I have here, and we're just going to form it back into shape. So just going to get some grinding on and get that rounded off nicely again. So we can see after a few minutes, we've gotten something that looks like a serviceable end of a handle again. You could put a little bit more work into it if you really wanted to smooth it out, or worst case scenario, cut it all the way off and just use green stuff to rebuild it. When working with white metal, kind of the prep process here, you also will have to deal with these little whiskers that are from the molding process that you don't get with plastic. So these can often just be pulled off by hand, and if you can't pull them off easily by hand, like this one, you can just take your hobby knife and just cut them off, since they're relatively soft. So with the hand cleaned up, we're going to move on to the body here and clean this up a little bit more. So I'm not sure how well it shows up on camera here, but there are some thin mold lines running across the top of the helmet and things like that. So just like you would do with plastic, just scraping off the mold lines, because the white metal is softer than steel. Just be careful to not put too much pressure, because it is very easy to kind of cut it and flatten it if you're not paying attention. So just did that for the entire model to clean it up a little bit more before painting. So with both parts free, we can see how they're going to go together here. So one's inclination might be just to glue this together. We can't use plastic cement here, so we can't fuse it together. And if we use CA glue, it's just going to snap off easily like that if there's any pressure put on the handle, because it doesn't bond super well to white metal. So the solution to this problem is to pin this together. So this is to run a piece of metal into the arm and into the hand that they will run parallel, basically keep that shearing action from snapping it apart. I'm using little 1mm brass rods here, which is my preference for metal miniatures, but you can also use metal paper clips. A lot of people use, and it's often what I use with plastic. So you can see here, this is where the rod is going to run into the arm here. And then there'll be a bit of that sticking out, and it's going to run into the hand. So that's going to give more contact area for the glue and also resist that shearing motion. That would be the problem. So for working on the hand, I'm going to be doing this manually using a pin vise, which I'm showing here. So a pin vise is just a small tool that you can press it into your palm, and it has a little swivel so you can just put pressure with your palm and twist to drill. It's a much more fine, precise tool than like a Dremel or something like that. It takes a little bit more time, but when dealing with something like a small hand like this, it's really hard to use like a Dremel and be precise. So this is a precision tool, relatively speaking, though it is a bit tedious. So with an appropriate size drill bit, this is probably a 1.05. Just kind of sit there and grind out that hole. So now that we have the hand done, we now need to address running the pin into the arm. So the first problem we have here is there's that little nubbin. Well, actually, first making sure it fits correctly, but you can see how it's going to go. But it's going to basically go straight into the arm, and it's going to go through that little nubbin. So we're going to want to cut that nub off because of the fact that it's going to be really hard to drill into that because it's kind of like a little dome. So we want to flatten the area out. And once we've gotten that cut out, we're going to be using a Dremel for this. And this is something I just want to briefly mention. Is this the standard chuck collar thing that you get for a Dremel for most of your tools? This will not work for the type of drill bits that you're often using. You need something, a chuck that looks like this. Dremel makes them. I think there's some knockoffs you can get. But basically the problem is no matter how much you tighten up this form of collar, your drill bit's just going to fall through. Like you can never tighten it. You need one of these kind of like low that look like your pin vise style. So now that we have that loaded up, just so that basically your standard Dremel will not come with the type of chuck that you need for this type of bit. Now talk safety. Since we're working with power tools, probably should be wearing some gloves because it is very likely that that drill bit will skip around. You don't want it going into your finger. Also, while you're drilling metal, it gets warm, so you don't want to burn yourself. Glasses, since we're drilling into stuff and there's going to be little specks of metal moving around. And also we're going to be generating potentially some metal powder, so probably should wear some sort of mask to deal with that particulate. So it is exactly what you'd expect it. You are just going to sit there and drill into it. As you can see, I'm having a little bit of difficulty hitting or getting it to bite in, but once it does, we're good to go. It is absolutely essential that you keep your head slightly in the shot while you're drilling. Just essential at present. So you're going to drill, it's going to get warm, you're going to lay off for a moment, and then drill again and keep on going. Once you're done the drilling process, because white metal isn't rigid, it's a little bit soft, it has a tendency to push away more so than just get drilled out. So you'll end up with this like kind of lip around the drill site that you'll have to go through and cut off, and you'll also probably have to widen the top of the hole just because as you're cutting off, you may push some of that back in. So you will have to clean off your drilling point. And so once we have this all drilled out here, what we're going to do is put out we're going to have the rod going into where it just kind of sunk into the hole to see how far it's going to go. And I'm going to mark off where we want to cut it. So again, another pair of snips. These are steel brass snips. These are not white metal or plastic snips, just so that we're not wrecking anything. I am working with a rod here. If you have a hollow cylinder type piece of metal to work with, which you'll have to saw this stuff, because if you try and clip it, you're just going to crimp it shut. Also, you need to cut it off screen so you can't see it well. So once you've gotten your bit of metal clipped off that you're going to be putting in, you just want to put glue kind of on the area, the site that it's going to be going into. I recommend taking the cruftiest, oldest bottle of glue that you have, so you have a bunch of grief actually getting glue out of it. It really helps the process along. So once you get a bit of glue on there, you're just going to drop the pin that you've cut off into there. Or well, actually, you're going to deal with a little bit of excess that you had first because you put too much glue because you're using an old bottle of glue. Yeah, do what I say, not what I actually do times, but you're going to just drop that pin in there and make sure that it's seated correctly. And you're going to want to let the glue dry completely, which will take a little bit longer because if you're monkeying around with it, it's going to be prone to popping out and things like that. You just want to make sure that it's nice and hardened before you start doing any more work. Once we've let that pin set in there, what we can do is make sure that the hand is deep enough. Might have to drill that out a little bit more and things like that. But just make sure that it sits right. And we can see here it's popped on. So we can see already, like, this is already a better joint than the previous joint. We haven't even put any glue on it. You can see sits nice. So as you would expect, we're just going to be putting another blob of glue onto the hand, attaching the hand, and then letting that dry so that we have a nice, firm, hard bond there before we do any more work, so we don't accidentally break it off early. So as you can see here, we've let it set and everything's in place and it looks good. And we have a nice, well-attached hand on our dwarf to work with. So moving on to removing that tab off the bottom. So as opposed to trying to just cutting this tab off, what I recommend is cutting off the corners of the tab, nibbling it off as I suggested, as opposed to just cutting through it. But basically nibbling off the corners, and then we're going to move to the middle section and kind of cut out the middle section so that we only have little nubs left on the feet. So you can see here that we've cut on an angle the outside edges, and then on the reverse angle, we're now going to cut into the center section, as so just leaving the smallest amount of material actually attached to the feet of our miniature. So just kind of working it through. And once we have that centerpiece all cut out here, you can see the last little bit of removing it. Just get that off. What we're going to do is come in and you can see those little tabs that are left on the feet. We're just going to cut those off so that we've completely removed it. As I said, this I find much easier than trying to cut through it in one big piece or trying to do something like cut it off with a Dremel. This is about the cleanest way you can do it in my experience. So this does leave us with a little bit of a rough bottom on our foot, like a little lip. So we're just going to have to take the file out and grind that all off. So just going to be filing away here, kind of the same thing that we were doing when we were reshaping the end of the handle. So once we've done that, we're going to kind of go through the same pinning process that we did and basically put into the base of each foot brass pin. So you can see just kind of the end of, there's no real need to it's the same basic thing as putting it into the arm. So we put 2 brass pins in and let them dry. Once we've got our pins completely dried, what we're going to be doing next is marking where we need to put holes into our base. So we want to take some paint that will show up clearly on the base. I just have some amethyst purple because it was what was on the desk at the time. I'm just going to stick the pins right in it to get some paint on there. And what we're going to do is take our base and we figured out where we wanted it on the base, and what we're just going to do is basically touch those pins down where we want them. Unfortunately, my pins weren't completely level, so I required a couple of attempts to actually get the markings to show well. So just getting it to press down. And so you can see here clearly purple for one of the markings. One of the other ones isn't showing up well here. But then we're just going to drill through that, or drill into the base, so that we have holes that the pins can go into there. Just working with resin, make sure that you don't, that's a little bit softer than the metal. So once we have those holes drilled, our miniature should just kind of stand on our base how we would want. So at this point, you could glue the miniature down to the base. I'm choosing not to at this point because I'm going to prime it as one unit, and then paint things separate and glue it together. Just because I know on the underside of the cloak and some of that stone is going to be difficult to get to if it's glued together. But that's the basic process for assembling a miniature or metal miniature and attaching it to a base. I hope you found this informative. If you did, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. I put out new miniatures videos weekly, normally on Saturdays. I also occasionally do Twitch streams where I do assembly or painting or unboxing type stuff. So I announce those on Twitter. So if you want to come over and see those, that would be cool. Other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.